Can I see if I look neat? Look in the mirror.
Okay, before we start recording, my wife wants to say a few words in honor of a good friend who passed away recently.
So this is the first yort site of my dear friend Sahava Druin, Sahava Golda Bat Baruch Binyamin. Her yort site was today, Kafchet. Now we're already in Kaftet in Israel, but you in the West are still in Kafchet Tevet. So it's still her yort site. And the first time I ever heard a Baal Shem Tov story was from her children. I went to meet her when I was living in Santa Rosa, California. And she wasn't home yet because she and her husband had become observant, and they were walking the 2 miles to go to the local synagogue for Shabbat services. I wasn't so observant at that point. I didn't know enough to be. And but her children greeted me and told me the very first Baal Shem Tov story I ever heard about how the Baal Shem Tov revived a Kala who fainted under the chuppah. And by doing some deal with the heavenly court. And so the Baal Shem Tov had a profound influence on the beginning of my turning around in Tshuva, turning my life around more towards Hashem and away from vanity of vanities, as Kohelet puts it. And so I wanted to dedicate this to her, Aliyat Neshama Sahaba Golda Bat Baruch Binyamin.
Aliyat Neshama, and our learning tonight should be a merit for her soul.
She was shlucha of the Rabbi Lubavitch in Miami, Florida, and did a lot of chesed, driving people where they had to go for appointments and delivering food to people who were isolated, especially during the COVID outbreak. She did a lot of Mesirut Nefesh and a lot of chesed.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Give me 1 second here. Sorry. Okay. We're continuing with the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. We are learning from his, not his, but his compilation of his teachings called the Keter Shem Tov. And for those who are following, we are starting on Kuf Bet. Kuf Bet. Now, the reason I wanted to start here is because the first 2 Torahs that we're going to learn tonight are connected to last week's Torah portion. And we're still close enough. So last week, it was Parshat Ve'era, and it begins like this: Vayedaber Elokim el Moshe, Vayomer alav ani Hashem. And Elokim spoke to Moshe and said, I am Hashem. Ve'ereh el Avram, el Yitzchak, ve'el Yaakov, ve'el Shaddai. I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with this name, El Shaddai. B'shemi Hashem lo nadati lehem. And my name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, I did not make known to them. The many commentaries, because when you look back in the book of Genesis, we see that Yud-Keh Vav-Keh spoke to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov many times. So the question is, what does it mean here that I appeared to the Avot, to the patriarchs, with this name? I'll use the name now, Kel Shakai. But my name, Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, didn't make known to them. So Rashi explains that the simple understanding here is that this name of God, and we're going to see that's connected to the sphere of Yesod, the second last sphere, that God made many promises to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov using this name of Kel Shakai. And that you could see clearly in the book of Genesis, along with the name Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, speaking to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. But this name also appears many times in the form of promises, especially of fruitfulness. When God first made a covenant with Avram, this name was used. Covenant is always connected to the sphere of Yesod, and that's why this name was used. But many times it has to do with fruitfulness and having children and expanding. So what does it mean here that my name, Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, I didn't make known to them? So Rashi explains that, yes, I promised them many things, especially the land of Israel. But I didn't totally fulfill my promise, because here Israel's been in slavery. Remember, this parsha last week were the last three of the plagues. And this week's parsha, we actually begin to get out of Egypt. And it's completed the following week when we go through the Red Sea and the Egyptians drown. So Rashi says, what does it mean I didn't make this name known to them? Because I made promises, but I didn't fulfill them. And Rashi points out that there are many verses in the Torah where the name Yud-Keh Vav-Keh will be included with, the name will be included when God wants to fulfill a promise, will fulfill what the verse is saying. So that is just an introduction. And so that's why these first two Torahs that I picked from the Baal Shem Tov are dealing with this name, Kel Shakai. So now we go into the text. And the first one, I have to say, it's not easy to understand the connections he's making. It's a short Torah, but I think I have a good explanation for it. So it begins by saying, Simcha ba'olam yedua shehi midat Avram. When there's joy in the world, it should be known that it is connected to the aspect of Avraham. Ish hachesed. Avram is called the man of loving kindness. And here the Baal Shem Tov is connecting joy with loving kindness. Now that is it seems like an obvious connection, but we wouldn't always think of that. When we think of chesed, we think of giving, altruism, charity, mercy. But here the Baal Shem is saying that when you do all those things, it should make you very happy to be in love, to show mercy, to give charity, should naturally be connected to joy. And that's what the Baal Shem is saying. And then he says, V'zeh shekatuv bekel shakai. And he says that is what is being alluded to in last week's parsha, where we read God saying, I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with this name, Kel Shakai. So here, the Baal Shem Tov is making a connection between joy, chesed, and this name, Kel Shakai. Now, this name is usually not connected to these because it's connected to the sphera of Yesod. So let's see what the Baal Shem wants to explain to us. So he says, Perush Kel Shakai, Shamar La'olamo Dai. So what does this name mean? Kel Shakai. So here we have the Midrash that says, and a play on words, if you take the word Shin Daled Yud, the Midrash says it stands for She'olam Olamo Dai. She is the Shin. Amar La'olamo Dai. That's the Daled and Yud of Shaddai. So what does that mean? He said to his world, enough. Dai means enough. Remember in Pesach, Dayenu? It would have been enough. So here, he's explaining that that's what the Midrash says. This name means God said to his world, enough. Now, what does that mean? Ki ha'olamot hayu yordin umit pashtin ad amke klipot. So before I translate this, usually when we think of the world, the world that we live in, we know from science that, if we go back to the Big Bang, that reality expanded in every direction. And according to science, it is still expanding to all six sides. But here the Baal Shem Tov says something interesting. That's how we usually understand. When he said, God said enough to the world, meaning you can only expand so far in every direction. We'll get back to explain that. But the Baal Shem says something a little bit different. He says that he treats it more spiritually, not so much spatially. That the world was expanding spatially in every direction. The Baal Shem Tov says because the worlds were descending and expanding into the depths of the klipa, into the depths of the shells of negativity, of evil. Chas v'shalom. Shelo yeh az machmat amkei klipot hara govera al ad shamar dai. Because if God would not have said enough, the world would have continued to descend so far into negativity and evil, we wouldn't be able to pull ourselves out. This reminds us a little bit of how they describe a black hole. They say that a black hole has such concentrated effort. The gravity of a black hole is so enormous that anything that passes over what's called the horizon line gets sucked in and can't come out. And they say even light, if light is, we'll use the word, swallowed up by the black hole, it can't get out. The gravity is too strong. So the Baal Shem continues, Al kain yesh limtoch ulalot kol inyanim l'shorshan al yedei Shem zeh. Therefore, each person has to try to sweeten and to uplift all matters of the world back to their root through this name. Now we're going to see that the next Torah we're learning is really a continuation of this. So now let me try to explain here. So the Baal Shem Tov is saying not just that the world was expanding in every direction spatially, but the world was in a certain way falling into a black hole. That's really what he's saying here. And that if God wouldn't have said enough, all of reality would be swallowed up by negativity, by the klipot, by the what are called the shells, the other side. And so the Baal Shem Tov is saying, therefore, a person has to realize, even though God said enough to the world, there still is a good portion of the world that has fallen. This is what we've talked about many times, the breaking of the vessels. And again, you'll see in the next Torah how this is connected. So therefore, we have to, in a certain way, be like God. That's what he says. How do we lift up everything back to its root? Through this name. What does that mean? So the Baal Shem Tov is saying, just like God said to the world, enough, a person, listen what I'm saying here, a person has to be able, in certain circumstances in their life, to be able to put the brakes on, to put a red line and say, enough. Now, this will apply to every person in a different way, but we all know that sometimes we get a little depressed, sometimes we get a little frustrated, sometimes we think that things are hopeless, all kinds of things like this. The Baal Shem Tov is saying we need this name in our own lives. We need to be able to stop the fall, to stop the cycle of negativity that our minds can quite easily fall into. So this is a very, very deep concept here, because what he's saying, again, he says that because of the reality of the world, we have to be able to sweeten and lift up everything to its source through this name. And just repeating what I said, through this name means that we can have the discipline, the strength, the courage to know when to say enough to ourselves, sometimes to other people. Let's say other people are abusing us, not necessarily physically, sometimes physically, but just psychologically. People are taking advantage of us. This is just an example that this name represents, to be able to say enough. Okay, now we're going to go to the next one, which is Kuf Bet, and we're going to see the connection here. And he begins by quoting from the Parsha, Ve'ereh el Avram Yitzhak v'Yakov be'kel shakai. That God appeared to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov with this name, Kel Shakai. Shehu sod shesh kitzavot. So now here he says this is the secret of what are called the 6 lower svirot, but it also, kitzavot means directions. It can be used in either way. So here before we talked about that the world was expanding, and God said to his world, enough. So he said this is the secret of understanding the spatial dimensions of the world, but also understanding the 6 lower sfirot, Chesed, Gevura, Teferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. Remember, this name is always connected to Yesod. So he continues, again by quoting, Shemi Yudke Vavke Lo Nadati Lehem. But this name, Yudke Vavke, I did not make known to them. And again, what Rashi means is, I promised to bring them into Eretz Yisrael, but I haven't fulfilled that yet, but now I am going to. And that's why God appears to Moshe and says, I'm appearing to you as Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, not just you, the whole generation coming out of Egypt. I am appearing now as Yud-Kei Vav-Kei because I'm going to fulfill my promise. I'm going to take you out of Egypt and I'm going to bring you to the Holy Land. Now it sounds like he's like changing gears a little bit. And he says, She'iten adat b'chol derachecha de'ehu, that a person should apply his da'at, his knowledge. And he brings the verse that we've discussed many times. One of the greatest teachings of the Baal Shem Tov is a verse from Mishlei that says, B'chol derachecha de'ehu, in all of your ways know him. And this is what the Baal Shem, it was a tremendous teaching in his day that ultimately everything can be spiritual. We don't divide the world between secular and religious, mundane and holy. Everything that you do, b'chol derachecha de'ehu, in all of your ways, know him. In all of your ways, know him. Now, this obviously, the Baal Shem Tov is connecting to the 6 directions and the 6 lower sfirot. He continues, Shehu devar nifla. He says, this is a wondrous thing. Ki tzarich liten adat b'chol devar gashmi, gam kein lahaloto ulekashro ulechaber ha'oel liot echad. He says, because a person needs to direct, apply, focus his da'at, his knowledge, also including wisdom and understanding, with everything physical. Also everything physical, to lift it up and to connect it and to make the sanctuary one. Ha'oel liot echad. When God commands us to make a mishkan, and they put together all of the curtains, and it says, when you put all the curtains together, v'haya hamishkan echad, the mishkan will become one. So that's what he's saying, that when we look at everything, whether it's physical, material, spiritual, and we look at it with eyes of da'at, of knowledge, of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, then we make everything one. That's how the oneness of God is revealed, is when our consciousness sees the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in everything. And he says also, when you learn something very deep, but you don't really understand it. He says, this is the midah of Malchut. This is the lower hay of God's name. We've actually learned a number of Torahs about the 2 hays of God's name. The lower one is Malchut. The upper one is Bina. So he says that if you don't understand something, remember, Malchut is the lowest of the Sfirot. So it represents that we don't understand everything about this world. That is for sure. But he continues, Kishinatan dat lavin v'yored li'amko az kishar v'chaber malchut b'bina. He says, but here's something you don't understand. But if you apply yourself and you focus and you really try to understand, and you go deep into the profound meaning of whatever you are learning, then you are making a connection between Malchut and Bina. You are connecting the 2 hays of God's name, and therefore that leads to unity. You're making the Mishkan one. This is a very, very profound idea here. And I want to delve into it a little bit deeper. So here, the Baal Shem Tov is saying something. It sounds simple, but it's far from simple. He says that a person needs, when they're looking at the physical world, the material world, spiritual matters, that we have to see the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge that is in this thing. In other words, not to see the world superficially, to look deep into everything and to see meaning in everything. And that, instead of just going through life, just kind of like just surfing on the surface of reality, that we want to understand things. We want to delve deeply into how everything works, how everything applies to us, and how we can use it to better ourselves and better the world. So, having said that, I want to show the influence of this idea on his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. In his classic book, I don't think you can see, Likutei Maharan, this is Rabbi Nachman's classic book. And in the very first Torah, it's in the second paragraph. He starts off with a different idea. But listen what he says here. Ki isha Yisraeli tzarich tamid lehistakel b'hasechel shel kol davar. He says that a Ish Yisraeli, this was also a very new kind of way, instead of referring to the Jewish people as Yehudim, he calls them Ish Yisraeli. This is 200 years ago. And actually the Baal Shem Tov also did it, but Rabbi Nachman is very known for referring to Jews as Yisraelim, as Ish Yisraeli. So he says, because a Ish Yisraeli needs always to look at the seichel. Here means intellect, but it means wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Shall call of everything. This is exactly what the Baal Shem just said. That's exactly what we learn. Here we see the influence on his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, bringing it in his very first Torah. He continues, Ulikshor atzmo ela chachma v'haseichel sheyesh b'chol davar. And a person needs to connect themselves to the wisdom and the intellect, the deeper meaning that there is in everything. Because if we don't apply our da'at, then we will never touch the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in anything. It starts from our consciousness. In everything that is happening around us, there is God's divine will and God's divine wisdom. That's what we say every morning. Kulam b'chachma asita. He made everything with wisdom, meaning everything contains God's wisdom. But how do we get to that wisdom? So the Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Nachman are saying, through consciously looking to find that wisdom, that spark of godliness within everything, that's how we come to understand. That's how we become connected to the inner wisdom of all things. And then he says, Uli karev lashem yiparach al yedei oto hadavar. And when we do this, then we connect to God through everything. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov brings B'chol Derachecha De'ehu. in all of your ways, know him. So here we see that Rabbi Nachman is giving over the Baal Shem Tov's Torah. But again, the fact that he's including it right at the beginning of his classic work, Likutei Maran, shows how important this concept is. So that's a very, very important idea. Again, this is like a formula for not looking at the world superficially, that we want to delve into the depths of everything. And even though those things that we think are just mundane and don't have much meaning, but we're told, Kulam b'chachma asita, God made everything with wisdom, meaning that in every, not just thing or entity, within each circumstance in life, within each opportunity in life, each moment of life, we can grasp the wisdom that is infused in that moment, in that space, and that reality. Now I want to bring one more aspect. And for those who have Orchard of Delights, you'll see it's the first Torah in Parshat Va'era. And I bring up a very interesting question. This name that we've been dealing with, Kel Shakai, again, the Midrash says, She'omar le'olamo dai. He said to his world, enough. So the way we understand it is that God is infinite and the world is finite. And so at some point, God said to his world, enough. No more expansion, enough. Stop expanding. Now, when you look into the history of physics, so Einstein admitted later that one of his biggest mistakes that he made is that many of his equations were based on a static universe, meaning that was not expanding, was static. It was almost like She'amar le'olamo dai, that at a certain point the world stopped expanding, and in the beginning, Einstein based many of his ideas on a static universe. But then in the late 20s, Hubble, after that was the Hubble telescope, he discovered that the world was still expanding. It was not a static universe. It was expanding. And in the last, I'm not sure how many years, not only is it expanding, it is expanding at an increasing rate, which is a total wonder. Because if we are, or science, put it that way, is proposing that everything began from the Big Bang, and that began the expansion. So in the laws of physics, most things will at a certain point lose their velocity. How long can something expand without moving in the other direction? And according to science, we're approximately 14 billion years after the Big Bang. So how do we understand that the universe is not only expanding, but it's expanding at an increasingly huge rate? So then how do we understand the midrash that he said to his world, die? So what I proposed is two things. First of all, even if the universe is expanding, and even if it's expanding at an increasing rate, and even with the knowledge now that there's, they say approximately 10 billion galaxies. Each galaxy contains tens of billions of stars. Each galaxy is many, many light years long, wide, however you want to say it. Nonetheless, in relationship to infinity, it's still finite. It could be from God's point of view that the whole universe is like an egg compared to infinity. That's one way we can see that there's no contradiction between the Midrash and reality. But the other one is also a very simple solution that we can understand that he said to his world enough that this is the power of gravity. That even though the world is expanding, gravity holds it together. What holds our solar system together? Gravity. What holds our Milky Way together? And because if everything is expanding, why doesn't everything just fly off the earth? There would be no possibility of life on earth if there was no gravity. So we can understand Sha'amar Lo'olamo Dai, he said to his world enough as the law of gravity, which it doesn't stop things from expanding, but it stops it expanding at such a rate that nothing can hold together. Everything would just literally fly away. So here I just want to give you the really startling statistics that the Earth is moving around its axis at approximately 1,000 miles per hour. In other words, the Earth is turning at approximately 1,000 miles an hour. So within a 24-hour day, you have the Earth is rotating, but it does that at 1,000 miles an hour. The whole Earth, what is a year? The amount of time it takes for the Earth to go around the sun one orbit. How long does that take? How fast does the Earth have to travel to make this orbit? Amazingly enough, it's 67,000 miles per hour to make the trek of one circuit around the sun. The Milky Way is also moving through space. It's not just the Earth and the rest of the planets around the sun. We're just this like tiny speck in the Milky Way. But the Milky Way is also moving. You ready for this? 500,000 miles an hour. The Milky Way is moving through space. No, excuse me, I'm going back. Our solar system is speeding through the Milky Way at 500,000 miles per hour. And the Milky Way itself is speeding approximately at 500,000 miles per hour through space. And here we are all sitting, learning together. I'm sitting in my room here. You're all sitting in your rooms somewhere. And it doesn't appear that anything is moving. That is gravity. But the reality is startling, that we are actually moving at super fast speeds on many different levels simultaneously. And yet, Sha'amar L'olamo Dai, he said to his world, enough. That is what maintains the reality of anything existing and not just flying away. So this is all connected to this name, Kel Shakai. And just to review here, this idea, which I wanted to show in the Baal Shem Tov, and then how Rabbi Nachman takes virtually almost word for word, and he encourages this idea that how we have to focus our dot. We have to focus our wisdom, understanding, and dot in everything to pull out the depths of God's wisdom, vitality, life force, will, and to incorporate it into our very beings. Okay, now we're skipping ahead to Kuf Yud. Kuf Yud, and then there's a little Yud Chet. Excuse me, Gimel. Kuf Daled Gimel. Says like this. Notice Adam Murkav Mechomer B'Tzura, Shehu Neshama B'Guf. So he says it's known that a human being is constructed from or consists of a material reality and a spiritual reality. This is the soul and the body. Hinei neshama titlahev tamid liyidabek bekono. And the soul is always on fire, inflamed, to cling to its owner, to its creator. Rak sivev hachomer mafsik hadvekut mita'ava. It's only that our physicality sometimes gets in the way, it divides us from clinging to our creator. And umitaveh gam lechomarim, and it is drawn towards physicality. The body is drawn towards physicality, whether it's sexuality or eating or drinking. Shehi gamkein tzorach gavoa levarer nitzotzin ukayotze bezeh. So here, if we just stopped right here, we might think what the Baal Shem Tov is saying is that the desires and the passions of the body are bad. He starts by saying that sometimes they divide us from our more spiritual nature. But he switches gears right in the middle and says that these are also for a higher purpose. This goes perfectly with all the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. With all of your ways, know him. And even though in potential, the desires of the body can drag us down, can drag us away from our soul and spirituality. But he's saying, but these physical desires and the way we fulfill them, they themselves have a higher purpose. And that is to exactly what we've been saying the whole time, is to find God's wisdom, God's life force in these things, and to draw out the goodness in eating and drinking and sexuality and everything else of the physical world. Kol lezmanim yiduim יכול לגבור הצורה על החומר, ולהידבק בו יתברך. That a person at any time can rule over their physicality. The soul can rule over our physical desires. And even when we are satisfying our physical desires, our soul, if it's directing it, it can direct it lidabek bo yitbarach, to cling to God with the most earthly actions. Besod hachayot ratzo v'shov. He said, and this is the secret of the angels running and returning. V'nikra katnut v'gadlut. And another way of talking about running and returning in the language of the Arizal, of Kabbalah, is what's called katnut and gadlut, small-mindedness and expanded-mindedness. Kamo shemati me'abal Shem Tov, sod tzimtzum shehu minei uvei, sod gimel reishim. Okay, that I'm not going to explain so much. But here, this is a typical Hasidic understanding of the world based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, that we don't divide the world between neshama and guf, soul and body, between holy and mundane, that we have the opportunity to take every reality, every action, every circumstance, and find in it a way to cling to God. So this is a teaching that we've gone over a number of times in different ways. Okay, I just want to see how much more time we have here. Okay, so we'll end with one more. This is something we've touched on before, but remember, the Keter Shem Tov has many, many different people are contributing what they heard from the Baal Shem Tov and what they heard from the students of the Baal Shem Tov. So sometimes there's a bit of repetition because different people heard different things, but it's all included here. So it says like this: Me'abel Shem Tov b'shem harishonim be'roi leyada sod achduto yitbarach ki b'kol makom shani tofes oto b'ktzei v'chelek min ha'achdut harei ani tofes kulo. So this is something we've discussed before. Very, very fundamental idea here. And it says that in understanding the unity of God, that in every place that I can hold on to a part of the unity of God, I am holding on to all of it. This is something we've learned before, the idea of, Dara, we're in Kuf Yud Aleph. Kuf Yud Aleph, Aleph. So this is what we learned before, that if you hold on to a part of the whole, you're holding on to the whole thing. So we've learned this many, many times. But here, I want to add, well, I'm going to continue. B'hinei me'achar shehaTorah me'amitzvot ne'etzlo me'atzmuto yitbarach. So he says, and because the Torah and mitzvot, they are part of the unity of God, shehu achdut ha'amiti, because God is the true unity. Imkein kishemekayem mitzvah achat al mechona be'ava. So therefore, when I fulfill even one mitzvah in a proper way with great love, shehia devekut bo, this is how we can cling to God. V'tofes b'mitzvah zu chelak ha'achdut. Here I'm doing one mitzvah, but since all of the mitzvot are part of the unity of God, therefore each and every individual mitzvah connects us to the entire unity of God. Im kain kulo biyado ki'ilu kayem kol mitzvah. So if one does one mitzvah, it's as if they're grasping the entire Torah in all of the mitzvot. Shehem klalut achduto, because the mitzvot are the all-encompassing way that a human being can cling to God. So that also is just a beautiful idea, because this we haven't touched on before. We brought before this idea, if you hold on to a part of an essential whole, you hold on to the whole. And if you remember, the metaphor that we brought from the Slonim Rebbe is, if someone falls off a moving ship and the ship continues to go, and someone notices someone overboard, and they throw a line, a rope, and the person grabs onto it. So as long as they're holding on to the rope, they're connected to the whole ship. That's the way the Slonimer used a metaphor to explain that if you're holding on to a part of the whole, you can experience the whole. One of the examples we brought is Shabbat. Shabbat in the Talmud is called 1/60th of the world to come. And so we've asked, look, that's it? Doesn't seem like very much, 1/60th of the world to come. But if you're holding on to one part of the world to come, it's as if you're holding on to the whole thing. So Rav Ginsburg brings that there are three essential entities other than God. Obviously, God is the ultimate oneness. But other than God, he explains there are three other realities that in essence have to be one. If they're not in their entirety, then there's something missing from them. So let's say you have 100 apples in a bushel, and you take out one apple. Okay, you still have a huge bushel of apples. So if something is by definition needs, let's say, 100, even if you take one away, it's no longer whole. So the three things that by definition need wholeness is the Torah, the Jewish people, and the land of Israel. How do we see this? The Torah is an obvious one, because we have a law that if you're publicly reading the Torah, let's say on Shabbat, and someone notices that there's a letter missing, a part of a letter missing, you can't continue to read the Torah. It has lost its definition of being Torah, because Torah has to be whole. So you would have to take that Torah and put it away. Hopefully, the synagogue has another Torah. They would take it out and continue to read. But until that Torah is fixed, in a sense, it loses its definition of being the Torah. We have this in metaphor, symbolic, the idea that if even one Jew is missing, then there's something with the unity of all of Israel that is lacking. And it's interesting that Rav Ginsburg brings the following example. Many of you have been following our classes on the books of the prophets. So if you remember back in the book of Yoshua, when we wanted to fight against Ai, the city called Ai. And in Jericho was the first place that we conquered. God made it clear, do not touch any of the booty. None of the booty can be taken by an individual. One Jew took booty. His name was Achan. And then they went to war against Ai, and Ai defeated Israel. And Yeshua was like, God, what happened here? You're supposed to be protecting us. We're supposed to be able to conquer Eretz Yisrael. What happened? And God said, actually just said that booty was taken. In the end, it came out, it was one person. And from that, we learned this idea that all of Israel is responsible one for the other. So here, the whole people were defeated in this battle because of what one person did. So that's the example that Rav Ginsburg brings of this idea of the unity. And we've learned that God said in the book of Shmuel, which everyone should know that we're starting next Sunday, the book of Shmuel, where it says, no one will be left behind. No one will be left behind. So that's the unity of Am Yisrael. And of course, it's connected because we're told that there are 600,000 root souls in Israel and 600,000 letters in the Torah. So just like if one letter is missing from the Torah, you can't read it anymore. So the same thing, spiritually, we all have to make it. God willing, we will all make it. And the last thing is the land of Israel. That the unity of the land of Israel needs to be in its fullness. And as long as it's not in its fullness, there's something essentially missing from Eretz Yisrael. That's why until Mashiach comes, really throughout all of history, we've never really attained the totality of Eretz Yisrael. Be'ezrat Hashem, with Mashiach, we will not only attain the fullness of Eretz Yisrael, but no one will be left behind. We have to pray very strongly right now that this applies to our hostages. No one can be left behind. In fact, many people were not ecstatic about the ceasefire because it's not 100% clear that it's going to guarantee that all the hostages will come home. Maybe yes, but maybe no. But we have to pray. It's what's happening. So we don't have much choice right now, but we have to pray no one will be left behind. But this has been a part of Am Yisrael. That's why redeeming captives is such an important part, and that's why we're paying such an enormous price right now to get every captive back, as we should. But it's somewhat problematic, as we have discussed. Anyways, let us hope that we will see all of our captives come home. We'll see everyone eventually coming to Eretz Yisrael, and we will see the full Torah revealed to the world. Every Jew back in Eretz Yisrael, whose holiness will expand to the entire world.